What we've studied so far is that there are three conditions in God's creation. There are the things that God created with all his heart, so to speak, investing himself personally in that creation. Those things are called holy. Those things are also transparent, in that they allow godliness to be visible, they allow God's will to be dominant. Then there are those things that God created not for its own sake, but as a means to an end, and those things are called translucent or permissible. They are permissible, as for example kosher food. It may be enjoyed, it may be eaten, but it is not in and of itself a holy food or a holy activity when eating it. But because it is neutral, because it is translucent, it does allow a little bit of godliness to show. God invested a little bit of desire into this creation. It therefore can easily become part of holiness. It can become part of godliness when the human being uses it for a godly purpose with a godly intention. So, for example, eating food when it's not Shabbos or a holiday is not itself a godly activity, but if a person is eating for a godly purpose, if the energy and the enjoyment gained from the food will be used for commandments, for observing God's laws, then it becomes part of the commandments, it becomes part of godliness. Then there are those things that God created with so little investment of himself, with so little desire, that it itself, these created objects, serve a purpose, but they have no godliness within them whatsoever, and therefore are forbidden, prohibited, not kosher. So there are relationships that are not kosher, forbidden. There is activity that is forbidden, like stealing or killing. And there are even beliefs and thoughts that are forbidden because they have no godliness to them at all. And so we're told, for example, that getting angry is similar to idolatry. Because when you get angry, you lose your temper. God is not present at all in your thinking and in your life for that moment. So we have the totally unholy existence, which is opaque. We have the neutral, which is translucent, and we have the holy, which is transparent. Now, when a person eats that which is forbidden, non-kosher food, and he does so not knowing that the food is forbidden, so there's no intentional sin, there's no intentional violation, and he's eating this food with a heavenly purpose. He wants the energy, he wants the strength that the food will give him so that he can serve God better, and actually does serve God with the energy that he gained from this food. The fact that the food was prohibited means that even with the best intentions, and even doing the holiest of things with the energy gained from that food, will not release the food itself and the enjoyment of that food from its unholiness. That's what prohibited means. It's locked away so that it can't be used in a holy fashion, whereas the neutral can be used in a holy fashion. Now, the souls among people are also divided into three categories. There is the godly soul, there is the neutral human soul, and then there is the dark, unholy soul. The unholy soul has no natural goodness to it whatsoever. It has to acquire goodness through good deeds and through the observance of the commandments. The neutral soul, the human soul, is not itself godly, but it does have a certain potential for goodness built in, created within itself, that is easily redeemable and can easily become part of the godly. And that's what's called exile. When we can develop desires for things that are not even natural to ourselves. Of course, psychologists have different terms for that. When we desire things that are unnatural. We don't really want these things, but we've acquired an appetite and a desire for things that are destructive rather than helpful to ourselves. And in the mystical language, this is called foreign demons. Everybody's got their natural demons, for with which they're meant to wrestle or struggle. But then there are foreign demons that are uninvited. When we have a desire for what is permissible, when we want to overindulge in what is innocent and legal, those desires are native demons. That's where we belong. It is natural to the soul, which comes from this translucent unholiness, to indulge in other things that are also from the translucent unholiness. But to indulge in things that are completely opaque is self-destructive and therefore an unnatural desire. So, in the breakdown, in this definition of the forbidden, the permissible, and the holy, we find that food, for example, if it's legitimately gained, not stolen, if it's kosher for the Jew, then the Jew may eat that food, but will be corrupted by it if he doesn't bring to it a heavenly purpose. This heavenly purpose is what elevates the food and the act of eating and the person doing the eating from a state of unholy potential godliness to a state of actual godliness. But what about the study of food or the study of nutrition? Eating the food is not a holy activity. It has to be given a holy purpose. What about the study of nutrition? The study itself is also not holy. It has to be given a holy purpose. A person goes to work. He builds things. He's a doctor. He gives out medicines. He performs operations. But what about the study of medicine? What about the study of physics? What about the study of mechanics? Is the study itself any holier, more godly than the activity that comes after the study? So the practice of medicine has to have a heavenly purpose. The study of medicine has to have a heavenly purpose. And just as a person eating without any particular purpose corrupts himself and the food, the same is true with studying a subject without a heavenly purpose. And of course we see this today, education without values, education without a higher purpose. It can be very frustrating, it can be very destructive, it can be very negative in its effect rather than positive. We find, for example, Maimonides, the great sage, was a doctor. He studied medicine, he practiced medicine. But knowing something about his life, we also know that he had a very wealthy brother who supported him through his studies and throughout most of his life. Obviously then, Maimonides didn't practice medicine as a means for a livelihood. He studied medicine not because he needed to make a living. He was well supported. So he studied the medicine and practiced the medicine for some higher purpose. So even study, even mental activity, even educating yourself is a human activity which is neutral, although there are subjects that are forbidden as well. But most subjects, the sciences, are neutral and can easily become part of holiness, or they can be indulged in without holiness, and then they become part of the corrupting influence that everything in this world has. In fact, A person studying any of the sciences, or any subject at all, without a heavenly intention, without a heavenly purpose, is in a way more corrupting than a person who spends his time babbling nonsense, wasting his time. Because the person who speaks nonsense, or even reads books that are nonsensical, is not involving his brain. He's not involving his intellect. He's using only, as we learned earlier in Tanya, the element of air within his soul, which enjoys this nonsense or meaningless activity. But when a person is studying a serious subject, he's actually using the intellect of his mind, the intellect of his soul. And if the study does not enhance the soul, if it doesn't benefit the soul, then it must necessarily harm the soul. So even the most respectable activity, the use of the mind and the pursuit of an education, needs to have a heavenly purpose. What are the heavenly purposes that study might have? If a person wants to make more money so that his life is more comfortable, so that he can serve God better, and that's why he engages in this study, that brings to the study itself a heavenly purpose, and it makes the study godly. A higher and deeper form of godliness is when the study itself, not the increased income, but the study itself is used in a heavenly purpose, in a heavenly way. Understanding God better through nature, understanding our purpose in life better through the study of the sciences, that itself is a godly pursuit, which is more direct than using the information to get a better job so that you have a better income, so that you have a more comfortable life, which permits you to serve God better. But either way, this is how we elevate the activity of the mind and bring even to the brain a heavenly purpose. And that is the symbol of the kippah, of the yarmulke that we wear on our head, that even the intellectual pursuits, even the pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of education, has to have a cap. There has to be an awareness that something sits above the head, that the intellect itself has to be given a purpose, a higher purpose, a moral purpose, a godly purpose, so that it is all guided by the same value, by the same belief, by the same rules of importance. So if a person is to eat with a heavenly purpose, if a person is to relate with others, interrelate with a heavenly purpose, a person should also pursue knowledge with a heavenly purpose, so that the purpose behind all of them is the same, and the entire life, the entire structure of a person's life is in harmony, because they're all measured by the same standard, they all carry the same value, and they all serve the same purpose. So the use of the mind without a heavenly intent can be more corrupting, more unholy than frivolous activity and senseless activity, because the mind is much more sensitive, much more crucial to corruption, much more vulnerable to corruption, and is more damaged by the unholy than, let's say, the eating or running around or engaged in nonsensical things. This picture of right and wrong, of good and bad, really enriches us to a much better appreciation and a much higher standard of service of God. When we think that the battle is between decency and indecency, when we are reduced to struggling against actual vile behavior versus decent behavior, then our regard for ourselves, our respect for our fellow human being, must also suffer and be reduced. But when we are told, as the Rebbe tells us, that the struggle is not between decent and indecent, but between godly and human, that we are either serving God's purpose or we are serving our own purpose, that everything we do, every thought, every word that we speak, and every act that we engage in has some motivation behind it. And there are only two possible motivations. One is to do what we were created to do, and the other is to do what we want to do. To indulge ourselves or to indulge the purpose of our Creator. That's the struggle. The struggle is to be human or to be more than human. So that in Torah, when we say evil, unholy, ungodly, non-godly, we're not talking about perverted behavior. We're talking simply about human behavior. Human behavior is ungodly until we bring godliness to it. Now, there are those who have no goodness in their soul at all and have to acquire the goodness through serving God. There are those who have goodness in their soul, but that goodness has to be elevated into godliness and made part and parcel of the godly. But either way, our struggle is not between what we generally describe as right and wrong, but rather between good and godly, between human and more than human. That's a much more noble, a much more dignified battle, a much more dignified purpose in life. Although there is a temptation for evil, and there is this distraction into that which is truly indecent and perverted. But those desires come from the outside. Those are like tests, obstacles God puts in our path. They're not coming from within. The righteous person doesn't have an appetite for that which is really beyond the pale of God's commandment. And so the appetite is not real. It is not descriptive of the human being. What's really going on inside is that the human being is committed to being human, but has an opportunity to be something more than human. And in doing so, not only does he elevate himself, but he elevates the world, the created substances with which he functions, with which he lives. Even they become elevated and brought to godliness as long as they are permissible and kosher. So that even the use of the mind, the study of the sciences, the pursuit of knowledge, can be ennobled beyond the level or the realm of human, and of course intellect is purely human, uniquely human, but even that can and should be elevated to a higher purpose so that it too becomes transparent rather than remain translucent, or worse, become corrupted into completely opaque. Now, we've seen in our generation, in our times, in recent history, we've seen how knowledge and education can become opaque, where science, physics, medicine can all be used in a very evil way to destroy people by the millions. Even art can be corrupt if it isn't given a divine or holy quality or purpose. And so the neutral can go either way. If used properly, it becomes transparently holy. It becomes part of godliness. When abused, it becomes the worst of evils. And when left alone, it is simply a neutral. It's neither evil nor godly. It's translucent. when we use the translucent with a holy purpose, with a heavenly purpose, then we are fulfilling God's plan of making a physical universe a dwelling place for himself. When the physical is elevated through the human, so that even the neutral becomes holy, then the completely dark, the completely opaque unholiness in the world simply fades away. Which is why we have no positive definition for unholiness. We have only a negative definition. Unholy, not what holiness is. Holiness means transparent to God. Unholy simply means non-transparent. So like darkness, it doesn't have a positive definition or existence. It is simply the absence of. So unholiness is the absence of holy, which is why it's called the reflection, le'umazeh, or it's called the other side, or the shell that hides the fruit. But when the fruit is revealed, when the neutral becomes holy, when the human becomes godly, then that which is without any goodness and without any godliness, that which is really opaque, simply disappears because it no longer has any purpose, it no longer has any function, and the world becomes a truly godly place. And that's the goal, that's the objective over all these years of history since the Torah was given, since the revelation at Sinai, and particularly in the last 300 years, since the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, which opened the doors to average people being able to study the inner parts, the hidden part, the secret part of Torah, the mystical part of Torah, which explains all of these things and shows us what we're accomplishing through the commandments, how we accomplish through the commandments, so that we know that we are getting closer to the time when human beings will all be righteous and therefore capable of turning their righteousness into godliness, and in doing so, changing the innocent and the permissible creations, the food that is permissible, the relationships that are permissible, the activities, the thoughts and the speech that is all permissible, turning it all from neutral and permissible into positively godly, into positively holy, because the world is becoming, the physical world, is becoming a dwelling place for God himself with every passing day, with every mitzvah that we perform, and with every human activity that we give a heavenly purpose. Now, giving an activity heavenly purpose can be a very self-conscious kind of activity, or it can be a very natural activity. A person can say, I'm going to eat lunch because for a heavenly purpose, so that I will be able to serve God better after I've strengthened myself or fortified myself with this food. I will be able to serve God better when I make a few more dollars and be able to give more charity and live a more comfortable life, freeing me to serve God with my heart and soul. That's a very self-conscious way of doing it. A more innocent way, a more natural way is, if my life is devoted to the performance of mitzvahs, if I am here to serve God to the best of my ability, then when I take out a few moments to eat, or to sleep, or to make money, or whatever it is that a human being needs to do, I don't have to consciously be thinking, I'm doing this for a heavenly purpose. It goes without saying. Since my life is about godliness, my life is devoted to serving God to the best of my ability, to fulfilling as many commandments as I can, then without having to say so, without even having to think so consciously, the food I eat is naturally a part of that godliness, because that's what my life is about. So when you're engaged in a very important activity to which you're very devoted and excited and enthusiastic, and you take a break to eat something because you just have to eat, of course that eating is part of the activity. Of course that's part of the project, because The project is everything in your mind and in your heart. So if you take a break to sleep, you take a break to eat, you take a break to exercise a little bit, it's all to get back to your main activity. So it all becomes godly. And of course, if we're devoted to unholy things, then even the neutral things we do, taking a break to eat, going to sleep, whatever it is, if it's all meant to get us back to the activity that we're devoted to, and that activity is not so nice, then even the neutral becomes part of the unholy. It also becomes not so nice. Then we're not eating in a proper way, we're not sleeping a proper way, only when we give it a heavenly purpose. Then eating, drinking, sleeping, everything we do becomes part of the service of God. The world itself is in the service of God. We have a Sunday night program for VIPs that you might be interested in. It's informal, it's questions and answers, it's conversation. It's really relaxed, it's really pleasant, enjoyable, informative, and kind of community-like. It's a Sunday night program. There's a Wednesday morning program for the VIPs, and there's a Wednesday night program. All of it just conversation, casual, laid back, unscripted. So join us, take a look, click the link below and see which of the three suits you best, and join us for some enjoyable conversation.